The sad thing is I tried to film this a week ago and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna give myself more time to think this through, and I still feel about just as ready as I did then to talk about this book that spans so much time and so many locations and a lot of characters. Hi, my name is Sarah Freshly and welcome back to Freshly Read Books. So today we're going to be talking about Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. This is another book off of the Booker 2021 Longlist, and it's really good. I'm glad that I get to finally start a video with being like, I really liked this. I still don't know if it gave me that like spark of being like, oh, I loved this book, but it's definitely the closest of the ones that I've read so far. So what is Great Circle about? It follows two characters that are in different timelines. The first one is Marianne Graves, whose dream is to become a pilot, and she wants to circumnavigate the globe longitudinally, right? Yeah, I'm pretty sure I got that right. And this is in the 50s when that would have been a very difficult thing to do. And also it really follows like all of Marianne's life. So it starts... Is she born when the story starts? She might be not yet born right at the beginning of the story, but basically goes from infancy up until later, but follows her through like learning about flying in general and getting this dream of hers and getting to the point where she can attempt the circumnavigation of the globe. And then we also have another narrator, which is Hadley Baxter. Is that right? I know Hadley's right. So we have Hadley, and she is in more modern times. I think technically it's like the 2010s, and she's actually a big actress, and she's just coming off of a large scandal when she gets the opportunity to play Marianne Graves in a movie about her and her attempt to circumnavigate the globe. So during this attempt, she goes missing, and the movie is just about that, like theorizing what could have happened, basically. So that's the general gist of the story, but there's really just like so much more to these characters, to the stories in general. Like, you see so much of them. This is the longest book on the Booker Longlist this year, and there's so much. It feels longer than it was. Like, it was 600 pages, but the amount of story that's in those 600 pages, it feels like it's even more than that somehow. But I really loved the atmosphere that the book created, all of the locations that you get to see, and you get to fully know these characters that are in the book. So that's actually the first thing that I want to talk about, is just like the characters in general. This isn't really like a theme of the book. It's just, wow, how great are these characters? And they're given such personalities, and you can see the personalities shift and grow as they age. It's done really well. So we have Marianne Graves, who is obviously one of our main characters, but she also is a twin. So her brother is Jamie Graves, and both of them have like such distinct personalities, and you can totally understand why they react certain ways in different situations and how they play off of each other, their relationship with each other, with others. It's done really well. So Jamie and Marianne are actually raised by their uncle instead of their parents because of this like ship sinking situation that happened when they were just infants, and they were able to get out of that, but then end up being raised by their uncle. And he's also quite the character, but is basically like the troubled artist type of character. And Jamie is very into art. And so they both twins kind of have a passion about them, but Jamie is a lot less pointed in his passion, I guess. And he kind of can be, because of the time period. He's able to shift back and forth between, okay, like, what am I going to do, and how am I going to be the type of person that I want to be, and what type of person does that even look like? Whereas Marianne sees a plane fly over her head and is like, that's what I'm doing. I don't care who says what about it. I'm going to do it. Which was very difficult for her because she was a female of the time period. And there were a lot of obstacles to get her from the point of wanting to be a pilot to actually getting the lessons for that, to having the accessibility to planes, to be able to fly, to be able to do it for money, and to be able to work up hours and hours of being a pilot when that's not really something that women were doing at the time. So Marianne, from a young age, kind of gains the affections of this older gentleman. I mean, older compared to her, definitely not a great age difference. And he's not a great guy. But he is basically ready to do anything to earn the affections of Marianne, which is grooming. He was grooming her. Like, let's be real. He even says later, he's like, I didn't want to like come on to you at the beginning because the age was too weird. So I just wanted to earn you. Like, I wasn't a great person, but I wanted to earn the ability to like be the person that's with you, which screams of I wanted to keep you in my life and like give you things, and then eventually when deemed age appropriate, which it wasn't still at the time, then we can get together, which is grooming. So that's Barclay. I don't know if I said his name yet, but that's Barclay. Oh, and he's a bootlegger, so he ends up giving Marianne the opportunity to learn how to fly, and then she ends up flying moonshine, is it? Around. So she like helps him in his bootlegging business, and they end up getting married. It's a lot to read through. But the whole time, I mean, it's interesting to see her perspective through it, because she believes that at one point she may have loved him, but also she was incredibly young when she first met him, and I don't think that the idea of love was really cemented in her brain, like what that means, and it may have seemed like it could be a type of love at the beginning, but throughout the marriage she's very ambivalent towards him most of the time. And obviously this book covers a long span of time, so we see very different versions of their relationship as the story progresses, and we see them in very different ways as the story goes on. And I am not going to spoil anything, but I'm going to try to stick to like more general events that happened in her life rather than getting too specific, where I think that I would be like spoiling the fun parts to discover and read about throughout the book. But I did want to touch on Barclay because that is a big part of the book. Like, his character is a big part of the book. And then on the flip side, we have Hadley in more of like the present day. That's the actress. And she has quite her own personality. And it's cool to see the similarities between her and Marianne, but also there's a lot of big differences. Like, Marianne has this passion for flight and like she wants to do that more than anything, whereas Hadley doesn't really know what she wants to do. She kind of more thinks of things like, what's the next thing that I want to do? And her career or her goals kind of like shift throughout the story, or really like the way she thinks about this one movie project, the one that's on Marianne's life. Her view of it changes throughout the book, and I think that that's the coolest part of her character. It's interesting to read about her life. I don't love reading books that are centered on celebrities, and so I didn't like having that aspect too much, but I think that she was an interesting enough character and there was enough nuance to it that it still carried me through. And I was particularly interested in her views on what this movie is doing for her career, or just in general as being like a movie available to the public to watch and to see this story. Because originally she sees it and she knows of Marianne Graves. She had Marianne Graves's book growing up. And I think that she not really idolized Marianne, but she definitely thought of her fondly. And then this project comes along and she wants to do it, but a large part of wanting to do it is to be able to further her career. She basically has been in a series of movies that were essentially like Twilight level, where, you know, they can really propel you into fame, but then it's kind of hard to leave that and be taken more seriously as an actor. So she's trying to like bridge that gap after like being done with, I can't even remember. Oh, Archangel, I think was the name of the movie franchise. And I believe they're also like based off of books. It feels very much like you could just like use Twilight and then it's like the same thing. So like coming off of that, where she's got a very specific type of fame, and then she has this big scandal, and then she's trying to kind of get past that and also be taken more seriously as an actress. And there's a lot of sexism that she has to deal with as well. And it's interesting to see like the different forms that takes between like Marianne and Hadley, because they're very different time periods, but they do still have things that they need to deal with just because of who they are. And so she sees this movie more as an opportunity to be like, here, I can act, and here's a more serious role that's based off of a real person. And throughout the book, she kind of starts seeing it in a different way, that maybe this isn't really about her and her career, but maybe there's more to it than that. And also she just gets really interested in Marianne's life more and more in general. Not only that, but her parents died in a plane crash. So then there's that part of working on the movie that's difficult, because she has to film in a plane. She has to basically simulate a plane crash for the end of the movie. And that can be very traumatic. Like, that's how she lost her parents. So that's not an easy thing to just do emotionally. So now that we've like talked about those characters, one of the like kind of themes of the book that I wanted to talk about was the idea of like different sides to a person and to a story in general. So I'll start with people, since we've already been talking about people, by talking through the characters. But the book has a lot of commentary on how different a person could be at different points of their life, to different people, and in different situations. And I really liked this portrayal of people. There are tons of great quotes about this. At one point, Marianne is living with Barclay, his mother, and his sister Kate. And there's this line that talks about how all three of those women are living with three different men who all happen to be Barclay, because they all have very different perceptions of him, of who he is, and he also acts differently towards each of them. And they are all women that are close to him in his life, but the way that their relationships are portrayed are obviously very different between them. So I thought that that was interesting. And their characters too, like, it's funny, they're not in the story for very long, but you get to know them pretty well, and it's fun to see even the little bit of character development that they have and what their wants and needs are. Shipstead just did a great job of portraying every person that appears in the story as a fully formed person on their own that happens to be interacting with the story that we're being told. And instead of being just people that are like driving the story along for the main characters, she does just such a great job at all of the characters. And then I believe it's Jamie who has the line, "You don't just mourn a person, you mourn your life with them." And so that when you're saying goodbye to a person, not necessarily because they died, but just in general, when you're realizing that your life is not going to be continuing with this person closely. And he's talking about how sad that is. And it's not necessarily just because of the person themselves, but it's about all of the ideas of a life that you thought that you would have with that person. And that makes it a lot harder to say goodbye, because you know, you are thinking in your life in terms of having that person in it and what it's going to look like with them. And then taking that out of the equation, you have to rethink about your own life. And so it's the sadness of not just that person not being there, but that life together not being there. And I thought that that was a really beautiful way to put into words something that it's just one of those things that everybody kind of feels, but it was a really succinct and nice way to word it. And then back to Barclay and Marianne, their relationship. There was an amazing quote that I loved so much and did such a great job of explaining who Barclay is, which was, he was always busy choosing bits and pieces of their lives to weave into the story he was constructing around them, like a bird building a nest, like a prisoner building a prison. And that's just like exactly him. Like, it's so easy to write off Barclay as being like, he's the bad guy. And he is. That's not to say that he isn't. But through the story, you get to see like his motivations and the way that he thinks and the way that he constructs these narratives that he believes so strongly, and how he just creates these stories in his mind by pulling just tiny bits and pieces of things that actually happened until his life looks the way that he wants to perceive it. And he's a very interesting character, despite the fact that, yes, he is the bad guy. But he does have a fully formed personality of his own, and that's what makes it so cool. So that's the whole like different sides of people and everything, but also as a much grander theme, and probably the main one for the book, is this theme of different sides to a story. Because we've got, this book that we have is... It goes so deep. Like, so we've got Marianne's story, and we've got like what actually happened to Marianne, which is the writing of this book. Marianne is a fictional character, by the way. Like, she's put into history, but she is a fully fictional character. Born out of an idea of, I believe Shipstead saw a statue in an airport in Auckland that was of a female pilot. And that kind of sparked the idea of Marianne to begin with. But anyways, so we've got this story of Marianne, like the actual story, what really happened to Marianne according to the book. Then we have Marianne's book. And then we have somebody else's book that's about Marianne's life. And then we have the movie that's written based off of that book. And then we have the actress playing in that movie and like her thoughts on it. So we've got so many layers of this story, and you see the pieces of it get distorted as you go layers up. And then you get to the actress's level, and she gets to know more information about what actually happens. And so you're literally brought around full circle, and it's just cool to see like how you have two pieces of a story, and it seems at first like, oh, this is a neat way to write a story, but what you really have is the truth and then this other story that's like really extrapolated out and being made into a movie over here. Like, it's just such a good idea for how to write a book and how to portray that in general. And at first I was kind of on the fence about having those two perspectives. It was cool being able to see the movie being made, especially once you started seeing areas of the movie or scenes of the movie and also the real life story. And you're starting to see like the inconsistencies as it goes on. But it wasn't until much later that I really realized the full... I think it was when one character was like, wait, why didn't they base the movie off of like her book instead of off the book that was based off of that book? And then I was like, oh yeah. And also, how many layers deep does this go? Like, this is a lot. So that's very cool way to write a book and to portray one story but in so many different ways. Like, it's so interesting. And then I had one more theme, but I don't know why I saved it for last because it's the weakest one. Like, it's definitely present throughout the story, and maybe this will be like a mention that if you haven't read the book yet, you can kind of look out for this, because it was one of those that I didn't really fully realize until late in the book, and then I had wished that I had been thinking about it from earlier on. But I know that there's kind of this theme of like being shocked out of something, kind of like when you wake up in the middle of a nightmare and it's like the shock to your system or a shock of something that happens in there that like wakes you up. There's a lot of situations that are similar to that throughout the book. So really the biggest instance of this theme, and where I think it dives into it the most, just talking about what this is like, happens to Marianne, and it basically is a shock that ends up changing, or she ends up making basically a life change. But to use an example that won't be a spoiler, because it's a much smaller like situation that happens that isn't really a part of the story as a whole, Jamie gets commissioned to do a portrait for this young girl who is like in an arranged marriage situation, I think. But basically, she's about to leave her parents and go live somewhere that she's never been to. And she's leaving completely behind, like, the life that she has known up until this point, to get married. And Jamie is commissioned to paint a portrait of her in order for her parents to have so that they can remember her by. Jamie, upon realizing that, like, that's what this is worried for her. And he believes that he sees this thing in her that, like, wishes that she could get a way out, or that somebody could, like, help her. And he slips her a note, or, like, he slips her his address and tells her, you know, if you want to try to get out, like, come find me, I'll help you, basically. And this note was enough of a shock to this girl to be where she's fully realizing what's going on, and that, like, she's got one opportunity to get out of the situation. And she does. She doesn't go to Jamie, which I really liked. I thought that was so cool, because really that would be going from, like, one situation where men are in control of her life and she's relying on a man to find her a husband, and then she'd be going to rely on that husband, and her only way out of that would be to rely on Jamie to get her out of that situation. And while I believe Jamie had the best of intentions through this, I'm glad that she found her own way out and made her own decisions. And I like to think that she's doing just fine now. But she had that shock of somebody recognizing and acknowledging the situation that she's in, and that maybe it's not such a crazy idea to want to get out of this thing. And that was enough for her to then figure out her own way out. Oh, you know what? I just, as I was talking, thought of another instance where this is so clear. In the very beginning of the book, there's a point when Marianne is riding a horse through this field, I believe, and a plane flies, like, right over her head. And it scares her, but it's definitely, like, a shock to the system. And of course, this is the instance that later leads her to get this passion for flying, to really want to become a pilot. So her life is kind of going down this one trajectory, and then this one instance changes that. And all of a sudden she knows, like, where she wants to go in life. I can't believe I didn't put that together, but that was, like, one of those instances where I wasn't really looking out for that theme yet, because it wasn't really made clear to me yet as the reader. But if you haven't read this book yet, then I highly recommend, like, looking for those instances, because guaranteed there are tons of them throughout this book. And I thought that was just kind of a cool thing that adds to it. But with all that being said, you already know that I liked this book, so you probably know what the frog's gonna say on this one. That's right, this one gets a ribbit from our frog, which of course means that I do recommend reading this book. You should definitely check it out, especially if you like the longer stories that are, I don't even think that this is specifically for plot-driven or for character-driven readers. I think it can be for both. And I know that some people were a bit bored reading through it. Like, I was looking through our Booker Discord, which links below if you want to join us and talk about each of these books. But reading through people's thoughts, I know some people struggled and were a bit bored, but I thought it was pretty great the whole way through. I definitely preferred reading Marianne's story versus Hadley's story, but even there were some parts of Hadley's story that I was interested in, and I was interested enough in her character and some of the other characters that existed in her life, that, especially further into the book, that I was okay. Like, it was still, you know, fun reading hers. I think it was really just because I liked Marianne's sections so much that it was even harder to read Hadley's, because I was like, okay, I just want to, like, get back to Marianne. But yeah, I think that this is a fun read, especially because of, like, how many different places exist in it. There's a lot of talk of, like, nature in general. I love when a book can describe nature in a way that you feel like you can see it, and I think that this book definitely does that. And and just seeing these characters' lives unfold. I was sad to finish the book because I'm sad to not be like hearing about Marianne and Jamie anymore. Yeah, I definitely think you should check it out if you haven't already. And if you have, let me know what your thoughts are on it in the comments. I'd love to see how you guys are feeling about the book. Also, if you could let me know which book you're most excited for me to get to in the Booker long list. I'm curious about that too. Oh, also the next video should have been an island. However, I still don't have it in my possession. I have no way of reading it. It's not available as an ebook in the US. And so I've ordered a physical copy of it. It will get here at some point. But yeah, so A Town Called Solace will be my next review, as I've already read it at this point. And I might also end up doing A Passage North before an island as well, because I'm nearly done with that one. So a little out of the original order, but it'll probably mostly stick to the same order. It's just an island will need to just be shoved in wherever it'll fit. Anyways, I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please do consider subscribing, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!